people like this for 20 years. They will get up every day, they will kill somebody and go have some chicken at KFC.
Crime and out of wedlock birth, black folks having babies, not being married, and stuff like that is out of control. And it's not because they lack material things, but because not all, right, but most of them lack moral character. Look what they did to the Dome. In 3 days, they turned the Dome into a ghetto.
We got too damn many urban thugs. Yo.
He is obviously telling his audience to take the law into their own hands and kill urban thugs in Atlanta.
The fact that blacks are 7 times more likely than people of other races to commit murder, 8 times more likely.
The only duty we owe to history is to rewrite it, rewrite it, rewrite it. Oscar Wilde.
Warning. Some information once heard can never be ejected from your mind. You will either be forced to suppress it or act upon it. You are about to hear the reality of the many untold or hidden things that have taken place in this world we live in. The truth of these things are now springing forth as a flood, as if a levee of knowledge has broken free. If you are a person who despises the truth, enjoys your delusion, and rejects knowledge, please keep it moving and don't bother to waste your time with this video. Because what you are about to hear will cause you to rethink everything you thought you knew. It will challenge your mind to the very edge of consciousness. So if you are not used to positive brain activity that may stimulate thought and change, get up, cut the video off, and continue grazing in the grass as a lost sheep. Watch your television to keep your mind weak. Drink the Kool-Aid of darkness and go back to sleep. Shalom. As young Elijah embarks on his research, he will soon discover that everything he thought he knew about his history was all wrong.
The cover-up of the accomplishments of black people. Chancellor Williams wrote a book called The Destruction of Black Civilization. And in this book, he outlined 7 points as to why he feels that there was a cover-up.
Ignore. Just refuse to publish any facts of African history that don't go along with our racial theories.
We need to create a religious and a scientific doctrine so that African slavery won't appear that bad after all.
What we need to do is flood the world with new African histories that contain our European perspectives only.
Start renaming people and places. Replace African names with Arabic and European names. This will disguise their true black identity.
Let's change the criteria for defining race. For example, 1 drop of Negro blood in America makes you a Negro, no matter how light the skin.
Yes, and when reporting ancient African history, reverse the standard. No matter how dark the skin, woolly the hair, or thick the lips, you don't have to be a Negro.
When black contribution to civilization is too obvious, let's find a way to attribute it to outside white influences.
When all the ancient historians contradict your theory, we'll just discredit them.
Young Elijah has just discovered that a cover-up of history is not only possible, but conceivable. There has been a conscious effort to wipe out the history of black people in this world.
What we need to do is flood the world with new African histories that contain our European perspectives only. What we need to do is flood the world, flood the world, flood the world.
Just over 100 years ago, a wandering prospector, a German by origin called Karl Mauch, searching for gold, came through these remote hills on a long trail and stumbled on this. He was the first white man ever to see it. And what he found, though he didn't know, were the largest man-made structures in any part of old Africa south of the valley of the Nile. a stone-built city in the heart of Africa. And yet the white people who first saw it were so blinded by their prejudices that they could not believe the evidence of their own eyes. Rather than face the possibility that Africans might have a history of their own, they fabricated exotic explanations and imagined fantastic rites in honor of faraway monarchs.
The educational systems of the world have managed to convince the original peoples of the earth that they are nothing more than a worthless chance happening. You have those such as Jordan Maxwell, who claim that we are some sort of primitive being that was
Isn't
already
it funny
here
that
before
Jordan
God
Maxwell
created them. Note the implication is that they
said
were
that
created by God
there's
and that
some
we evolved.
Caucasian people
The
that
favorite
actually
claim
have
of many is that we
monkey
evolved from
DNA.
apes, which helps them in stating in their
And
constitution
last time I checked,
that we are
Eurasians are
only
only people
3/5
that
human.
have ancestors that were
Was the
Neanderthals, new
eminent
man.
writer and historian Thomas Carlyle. In 1849, Carlyle published an essay entitled Occasional Discourse on the Negro Question, in which he appealed for a return to some form of slavery. It was printed and reprinted in magazines across the world and helped transform the 19th century debate about race.
Carlyle's voice is a kind of prophetic voice, you know, which booms out from his study in Cheyne Walk in Chelsea, and he writes these, you know, extraordinarily powerful prophetic pieces which were read, you know, with gusto by Victorians, and one can imagine them all sitting around their fires reading the latest periodical that's come out with this flow of rhetoric. In this case, in the Occasional Discourse on the Negro Question, the flow of rhetoric is about the necessity for inequality. Inequality is the proper way to run a society. Those who know should rule those who don't know. Men should rule women, white people should rule black, educated people should rule the masses.
It is a common myth that the dark indigenous people of certain regions are no longer there. They are still in these lands, but are strategically kept out of the media to enhance the deception. Let's talk about how Europeans colonized the whole world and dominated over the indigenous in favor of their own desires.
The whitening of a culture has been going on for thousands of years. Usually, when a land is conquered by a foreign people, the entire look of the people changes over a period of years. The women of that land are raped or subjugated as sexual slaves to their new masters. Much of their original history changes and becomes corrupt or assumed by their conquerors. A good example of this is Australia. The indigenous people of the land were black aboriginals. But when the British came and the British took over the land, the aboriginals were killed and pushed into the desert lands.
In the empire that the missionaries and abolitionists set out to create, indigenous peoples would see their cultures destroyed and their religions eradicated. And yet all this seems almost benign when compared with the grim reality of what imperialism became. Because during the 19th century, their dream was gradually overwhelmed by another vision. One that claimed that the dark races could not be civilized and should instead be exterminated. The British set about building a new capital and settling the surrounding countryside, land that for millennia had been the prime hunting grounds of the Aboriginals. Out in these fields and pastures, far from the control of the authorities, the settlers were free to displace and abuse the Aboriginals.
From the 1820s, huge amount of Aboriginal land has been taken up. Huge amount of Aboriginal land has been taken up. Huge amount of Aboriginal land has been taken up. And there is this enormous struggle between Aboriginal people and whites. Of course, it's very hard to document a lot of the settler violence because they know that it is against the law to kill Aboriginal people. They are being told that Aboriginal people are British subjects. But they certainly reveal in their diaries and journals the desire to kill Aboriginal people.
What became known as the Black War.
It's kind of
was
like
a
what the
hidden
Amish did to
conflict.
us.
The landscape itself was the only
If you
witness.
go back at Let's
British
Do
settlers
videos,
killed any
the ones they made
Aboriginals they
5-6 months
encountered.
ago, you see him
Whole
talking about how
groups
the
were
Amish
massacred.
pushed us
Kidnapping
out.
and rape
That's what
became
about how he
commonplace.
once went to
The
Amish
British
community.
then began to come up with
Like he was
strategic
named
ways to
D-Rain,
breeding out
white people
the
and that.
original
It
people
seems
of
like
the
they're
land.
taking our names.
Notice, if you will, the half-caste child. And there are ever-increasing numbers of them. Now, what is to happen to them? Are we to allow the creation of an unwanted third race? Should the coloureds be encouraged to go back to the black? Or should they be advanced to white status and be absorbed in the white population? Now, time and again, I am asked by some white man, if I marry this coloured person, will our children be black? And as Chief Protector of Aborigines, it is my responsibility to accept or reject those marriages. Here is the answer. 3 generations. Half-blood grandmother, quadroon daughter, octoroon grandson. Now, as you can see, in the 3rd generation, or 3rd cross, no trace of native origin is apparent. The continuing infiltration of white blood finally stamps out the black colour. The Aboriginal has simply been bred out. Bred out. Bred out.
They did not call themselves Aboriginals. This was the name given to them by the British. Colonization brings death to the original people of the land. Names change and history is erased. Before the British in 1803, there were an estimated 750,000 full-blooded Aboriginals. The last full-blooded Aboriginal was a woman named Truganini, who died in 1876. Another example of intentional breeding out of blacks is what occurred in Brazil.
When slavery was abolished, what did the white elite think about the legacy of African culture in Brazil?
What bothered them, or the biggest problem, was how to deal with the population of color. Various intellectuals believed for Brazil to become a civilized country, it had to have a process of whitening. For this reason, the government invested a great deal in European immigration to the country.
The Brazilian government paid for more than 4 million Europeans to migrate to Brazil. This was part of a process known as branqueamento, whitening. The government hoped that these new immigrants would outnumber the black people and breed with them, over time whitening the face of Brazil. Whitening the face of Brazil.
Whitening the face of Brazil.
Both its gene pool and its culture.
From then on, the government began to persecute practices that were seen as black, like candomblé and capoeira, trying to convince people that these practices were barbaric and that it was a civilizing act to stop them.
History is being changed all the time. And then the people that control things, what do? They suppress the truth by calling you a racist if you challenge their version of history. I find it amazing that in every continent, the indigenous people of the land are much darker than the people that reside in the land today. What most don't realize is that the original people are still in these lands, while the lighter carbon copy of these people are pushed to the forefront, and the darker people are pushed in the shadows of the land.
History has left some very impressive proof and evidence of what has happened. However, there are those who have set out to cover up true history and replace it with deception to cause particular groups to be shown in a better light than what history has already played out. They've also set out to recast historical figures as a race or a culture that wasn't true to real history. Much of our history has been whitewashed to portray the white race as always being on top. And we know that this is widely not true. Ancient Egypt. Was it a black civilization? Or was it a white civilization?
Welcome to the Black Land.
We are the Kemichu, the black people of Kemet, the Black Land.
Come and see how your mother's hand and your father's hand made bare earth and speak with stone of godly proportion. We sit in celebration of you, my black family. We, the black people of high birth, saluteth you, my black family.
We celebrate the Wimi Mehesu, the rebirth.
Black and beautiful. See us, we are Kemet, black.
Black from the first time, the Septepi.
There is none before us.
We have been since the first time.
My black father, take the handle and pull the guide, and he will safely lead your soul to the resurrected one, O said, to be given eternal life. Come and break bread with us, my black family. My beautiful black sisters, I bring you sustenance.
Come, my beautiful black brother, we hunger for you and your offerings.
We are black and we are blessed. There can be no doubt that the Colchians are an Egyptian race. My own conjectures were founded first in the fact that they are black-skinned and have woolly hair.
I am Anut Tawhid, high priestess of Amen, of the Kemichu, the black people of Kemet, the Black Land. Bear witness to the year upon my name. It does not bear false witness against me. And these, my black children, the Kemichu, the black people of the Black Land. Can you not see in them the reflection? We are the black people, the first people in the world.
Ra Hulakati have made his firstborn children black of skin.
Look upon my face and tell me the Kemichu are not black people.
This black woman needs her beautiful black brother.
This black man.
Let's talk about ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians, more than any other culture, have left impressive proof of who they were as a people. When you look through the walls of Egypt, you see black images, people of black or brown skin. Now we know that there are those who have set out to whitewash ancient Egypt through portraying them as white people in movies, books, and you name it, all kinds of media that has been printed and published to try to whitewash them. But the real proof is right there on the walls of Egypt, where you see black people. But what Europeans have attempted to do to disprove this vast photo album is to give you implausible explanations. Here are some of the ridiculous claims being made by Europeans. First, they claim that the black skin doesn't necessarily mean that they were black, and that the braids, the afros, and the other Negro hairstyles were just headdresses. Some Europeans also claim that Egypt is not necessarily part of Africa. Another claim is that the white race used to be darker and that they only lightened up in recent times. So you see, the dark images in Egypt are really just darker white people. Other claims is that whites used to portray themselves as black in ancient times. Or here's another one for you. Here's a doozy. The black images seen on the walls of ancient Egyptian tombs are actually the images of those whom we conquered. And they also claim that it was common to not show themselves as white on the walls of Egypt, but to only show the images of their enemies. Now here's the last ridiculous claim being made that I'm going to give you. The black images or statues that you see are only dark because they darken over time, but they were actually white, Nordic, or Celtic people. Those are just a few of the outlandish reasons why Europeans are claiming to be the ancient Egyptians.
Egypt of the pharaohs was the greatest and the oldest and the most inventive of all the high civilizations of antiquity. And it flourished for 3,000 years. It set a pattern, an example for peoples near and far. But where were its roots, its origins, its starting point? Most of us have believed or have been taught that the glories of the pharaohs could never have been created by African people or African ideas because, it's been said, Africans could never have built a high civilization. And I imagine that most visitors conclude as they listen to their guides that a statue such as this of the young king Tutankhamun may have turned very black in the course of centuries, but could not have been a black man in the first place.
What a funny
it
guy.
followed that the royal children were often black as well, as was King Senusret, seen here wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. Or this pharaoh, of unknown name, but obviously of high prestige in his time, and just as clearly African.
When all the ancient historians contradict your theory, we'll just discredit them.
Despite these ancient images of young King Tut with clear dark brown features and African features, Europeans have completed their very own deceptive reconstruction to make him appear white. Now, the Europeans also claim that King Tut's DNA traces him back to Europe. What they fail to realize in this absurdity is that the DNA of all humanity goes back to a single black African tribe, including that of Europeans. They also fail to realize that blacks have been all over this planet, so you will find African DNA in every man, woman, and child. This point was brought out in a recent scientific documentary on the National Geographic. The film was called Search for Adam.
Understand how this could be. We must discover scientific Adam's lost Eden. Enter his world and look him in the eye. At an unexpected crossroads of Bible and biology, we're headed on a search for Adam. Finally, Wells comes face to face with the man he's been searching for. A new portrait of the common ancestor of every man today. Adam. Without the skull, we can't know for sure what Adam looked like. But a combination of genetic evidence, Bender's forensic skills, and cutting-edge computer software suggests he looked something like this. Thousands of years after the Bible, and hundreds of years after Michelangelo, we have a whole new face for Adam.
people living in equatorial Africa are living in a hot environment, the skin must have been able to sweat very efficiently so that people could keep cool. And also because that skin was naked and therefore was prone to damage from ultraviolet radiation. And so the skin of our ancestors was dark, full of the natural sunscreen, melanin.
Even science recognizes that the first humans on Earth were black and that all other races came from them. It should be common sense that you can get white from black, but you cannot get black from white. But for those who don't understand this, let me break it down for you. It is very common for the couple on the left to be able to produce any of various shades of skin color when having children. However, the couple on the right are only able to produce children with a shade of skin color after their own kind. Here are examples of children produced by black parents. While we have many examples of the couple on the left producing children of various shades, the couple on the right can never produce a child that looks like Wesley Snipes. When the topic of Ham, the youngest son of Noah, is brought up, Europeans love to bring up the curse that was passed down by Noah. They like to use that to claim that the whole black race was cursed. You know, even that was done erroneously because Ham was not cursed. Only his son Canaan was cursed. You know, they also failed to mention that Ham had 4 sons. He had Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. And you know the land of Egypt was originally called Mizraim after the original founder. You know, the son of Ham. So that clearly shows that the original progenitors of ancient Egypt were black people. Mizraim was the original Hebrew name for Egypt as recorded in Genesis 50 and 11.
This is a grievous mourning to the Egyptians, wherefore the name of it was called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond Jordan.
This is what Flavius Josephus writes concerning Mizraim. Now all of the children of Mizraim, being 8 in number, possessed the country from Gaza to Egypt, though it retained the name of one only, the Philistin, for the Greeks called part of the country Palestine. Antiquities, Book 1, Chapter 6, Verse 2.
Start renaming people and places. Replace African names with Arabic and European names. This will disguise their true black identity.
A few years back, I had a co-worker that was from Egypt that spoke French. After doing some research, I discovered that French is like a second language to Arabic for most modern-day Egyptians. How is it that we see these people in the land today as Egyptians when the ancient Egyptians showed themselves much darker on the walls of Egypt? There's a reason for this. In the days of Napoleon, Egypt was an Islamic country ruled by Arabs. When Napoleon conquered Egypt, he was shocked to see strong African features on the giant Egyptian statues.
Count Constantine de Volney, during a trip to Egypt from 1783 to 1785, said this, and I quote, he says, "On seeing that head," what head? The Sphinx of Giza. "Typically Negro in all its features, I remembered the remarkable passage of Herodotus, the ancient Egyptians were true Negroes of the same type as all native-born Africans." Now, I want to ask this question. What would motivate him to say this phrase, typically Negro in all its features? Could it be perhaps this? This was an artist's conception, Vivant Dinan, who accompanied Napoleon's army, 1798. This is his artist's conception of the Sphinx of Giza. Before what happened? Before the lips and the nose were shot off by Napoleon's troops. That is verifiable because Dinan was an eyewitness to those lips and the lips and nose being shot off by the soldiers. Why did they do it? We cannot climb into their hearts in the 21st century and figure this out, divine the entrails of frogs, and try to figure out why they did it. That's between them and God. But what happened, happened. And so when you look at this, you know that this definitely was patterned after an African man, regardless of who the identity of that man was.
What was it about the nose and the lips that caused the French to destroy the statues? Just look at the number of statues with the nose removed. The noses and the lips told a story about these people. A story that the Europeans did not want to hear. A story about a great civilization of black people that once ruled the world. What did the ancient Egyptians look like? Their women wore braids. What people on earth to this day are known for wearing braids? Braid salons today are a multi-million-dollar business, and the majority of their customers are black women. Some of these braided hairstyles are identical to the styles women wore in the days of the early Egyptians. Even some of the men's hairstyles are similar. And I doubt if I've ever seen any Caucasians wearing any of these hairstyles.
Yes, when reporting ancient African history, reverse the standard. No matter how dark the skin, woolly the hair, or thick the lips, you don't have to be a Negro.
Ignore. Just refuse to publish any facts of African history that don't go along with our racial theories.
Ignore the Christ stuff. I'm not going to agree with everything these guys are saying.
It is often said that color and race
But hopefully
shouldn't matter.
you guys should choose to stick
If
around
that were
anyways.
true, why did Europeans deceptively change the images of
When you go do your
historically
homework,
black people to
you
white?
come to realize that
If color and race
there's
didn't
no
matter,
one before or after
one
the
must
Creator.
ask,
Isaiah
why
43:10
then
talks
was
about
the
this.
history of black people
The 11th verse talks about how there's no Savior.
Hollywood always cast ancient biblical characters as white. This deception programs the viewer to envision white people when reading scripture. During the Renaissance period, a huge makeover of history took place with a paintbrush and a lie. And laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen hath sought to paint the likeness of their images. For thy sanctuary is trodden down and profaned, and thy priests are in heaviness and brought low. 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verse 48 and 51.
Today, there are only 66 books in the Bible. The late 19th century 1611 King James Version Bible, used by clergy and church members, contained 80 books. Who removed the other 14 books, known as the Apocrypha, out of the original Bible? There are several passages in the Bible that mention books not included, such as the book of Jasher. 2 Samuel chapter 1 verses 17 to 18 in the King James Version. And David lamented with his lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. Also he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher. The book of Jasher is mentioned in the Bible, but the book itself was not included. There are actually hundreds of scriptures and transcripts that were found and not added to the Bible. This was done by the same people that changed and distorted history. Why? Did they have something to hide? The Book of Enoch contains some very interesting information in which many Christians are not familiar with. Western scholars believe that the Book of the Watchers, which is contained in the Book of Enoch, date from about 300 BC, and the latest portion, the Book of Parables, was probably composed at the end of the 1st century BC. This pretty much validates the book. Not to mention the Tertullian, 160 to 230 CE, even called the Book of Enoch Holy Scripture. The Ethiopic Church even added the Book of Enoch to its official Bible. It is wholly extant only in the Ge'ez language, with Aramaic fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls and a few Greek and Latin fragments. This information alone has proven the authenticity of the Book of Enoch.
It's generally taught in the churches today that Noah's 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, represent 3 groups of people. Ham, the black man, Japheth, the white man, and Shem, everyone in between. If you look a little closer in the scriptures, you'll see that it reveals the truth about those 3 boys.
And after some days, my son Methuselah took a wife for his son Lamech. And she became pregnant by him and bore a son. And his body was white as snow and red as the blooming of a rose. And the hair of his head and his long locks were white as wool, and his eyes beautiful. And when he opened his eyes, he lighted up the whole house like the sun, and the whole house was very bright. And thereupon he arose in the hands of the midwife, opened his mouth, and conversed with the Lord of righteousness. And his father Lamech was afraid of him, and fled, and came to his father Methuselah. And he said unto him, I have begotten a strange son, diverse from and unlike man, and resembling the sons of the God of heaven. And his nature is different, and he is not like us. And his eyes are as the rays of the sun, and his countenance is glorious. And it seems to me that he is not sprung from me, but from the angels. And I fear that in his days a wonder may be wrought on the earth. And now, my father, I am here to petition thee, and implore thee, that thou mayest go to Enoch our father, and learn from him the truth. For his dwelling place is amongst the angels.
If a black couple has an albino child today, is that child considered black or white? We all know that they're still considered black, even with the presence of white skin. This albino offspring is still capable of producing children with normal brown skin. This was the case of Noah. Noah was a black albino man with a black wife and had black children, and we will prove this. Notice how Noah's father Lamech responded to him at his birth. He responded in abject fear. He wondered why his son's skin was white. He questioned if he was the child of angels, and doubted that he even belonged to him. His concern was that his son looked nothing like him or his wife. Now, if Lamech himself or his wife were white, why would they be surprised at the appearance of their son? The fact that Noah had black parents gives you an indication that he himself was not a white child, as in European, but an albino. This image is a prime example of the case of Noah, an albino dad with a black wife and 3 normal-looking children. Albino does not equate to European. Ham, the father of Mizraim, also known as Egypt, and Shem, the father of the Hebrews, more importantly the children of Israel, all look the same in appearance. Even Zondervan's Bible Dictionary prints the following. Ham is the father of the dark races, Africans, but not the Negroes. So then who is the father of the Negroes? Shem or Japheth?
Description of the Hebrews. The walls of Egypt gave a description of the people that lived there, and since the children of Israel were slaves there for more than 100 years, wouldn't there be images of the true Israelites on the walls? But how do we know what they looked like, and what did they wear? If we look closely at the scriptures, we can see with our own eyes what they must have looked like. In Amos chapter 9:7, it says,
Are ye not as children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel, saith the Lord? Have not I brought up Israel out of the land of Egypt?
The children of Israel resembled the Ethiopians, which are actually Cushites, descendants of Ham's son Cush. Europeans refer to them as Nubians. Let's compare the description of the Israelites in the scriptures with the images of the so-called Nubians on the walls of Egypt. The Israelite men and women wore golden earrings as recorded in Exodus chapter 32, verses 2-3.
And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron, and said unto him, Up, make us gods which shall go before us, for as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him. And Aaron said unto them, Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, of your sons, and of your daughters, and bring them unto me.
The Israelite priests, which were men, wore bonnets upon their heads, a cap as hemispherical, as recorded in Leviticus 8:13.
And Moses brought Aaron's sons, and put coats upon them, and girded them with girdles, and put bonnets upon them, as the Lord commanded Moses.
The Israelites wore fringes upon their garments, as recorded in Numbers 15:37-38.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and bid them that they make them fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generations.
The Israelite priests, which were men, wore a scarlet color, red girdle. The Hebrew word for girdle is abnate, which means a belt. Hebrew dictionary, belted, girded with, as recorded in Exodus 39:29.
And a girdle of fine twined linen, and blue, and purple, and scarlet, of needlework, as the Lord commanded Moses.
The Apostle Paul even wore a girdle, as recorded in Acts 21:11. They were a dark-skinned people